So, hey, this is Ethan Burke with Irongate Realtors. I'm here with...
Brett Williford, also of Irongate Realtors.
You're the big wig. You pretty much run it around here, right?
Well, I guess that depends on who you ask, but yeah, part of the palette of responsibilities.
Nice. How long have you been doing it?
I've been a licensed realtor since 1995, actually. I've been at Irongate since 2017.
Very cool.
Full-time kind of from day one, and just kind of fell into a career I love and still love what I do today, and it's just kind of worked out very well for me.
Nice. What did you do before this?
I actually worked for Dayton Public Library System, several different capacities, mostly kind of on the finance end.
Okay. I think I know somebody whose wife is like head of security for one of the libraries. It seems like they have to do with a lot of like crazy people coming in.
Yeah, that was always kind of one of the fun things, especially with working at the downtown main library branch for sure.
I think that's where she's at.
Gotcha. But yeah, I mean, kind of found a pathway to real estate. My grandfather had been in real estate, back in the 70s, and just kind of his stories and just kind of as I worked forward with things, was just a bit of a passion for it and kind of fell into it at the right time. And like I said, it's just been kind of going through the ebbs and flows of the industry. Been a lot of changes since 1995 for sure. But like I said, it's still it's been a great career for me, and look forward to continuing it.
Nice. What is the longest you ever went without a paycheck?
It's probably actually when I first started in real estate. I think it was 4 to 5 months before I actually had my first payday. So that was probably the longest stretch. Thankfully. So the pipeline aspect is definitely important, and kind of making sure that you keep prospecting as part of the daily routine. But it's the best thing you can do is take care of your clients and look forward to them referring and using you again. So that's been kind of the crux of my business for a long time.
Learned it's definitely a snowball kind of thing. The more people you help, the more they can refer you to other people, and you can help them, and then it just kind of grows.
Yeah, for sure. I have a client that I've done a tremendous amount of business with, and a lot of referrals, and he calls me his real estate ninja, which obviously I'm not the stealthiest person in the world, but it's neat the relationships that you can build, and people really come to depend upon your services, your knowledge, and really, I mean, they're banking on the fact that you're going to treat them as you would your own family, with the largest transaction of their life to that point. So it really is an honorable position to work with, and a lot of people become lifelong friends, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, it is nice. Eventually, you know what you're doing, you show that to people, and they trust you to help them with that big purchase.
Right.
It is really difficult when you first start and you're still learning, getting somebody to trust you with that first deal. So I've always been really, really thankful for the first person I helped who actually put that faith in me, and we made it work.
Yeah, for sure. And I was 24, 25 when I started, and nobody wanted to work with a 24 or 25-year-old at that point. There was no social media, so you really couldn't put out your scope of business, your intent for a client, and it was a challenging time for sure, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I learned a lot during that time period. And we talk in the office a lot about the fact that we all kind of wear our tool belt, and how do we load that with the tools necessary to get the job done.
Have you ever been on a team, or have you always just been solo?
Pretty much have always been solo. I worked with a couple of different agents early on, kind of in a buyer agent style capacity, but it wasn't something formal. It was pretty loosely knit.
It was like a individual transaction kind of basis?
Pretty much. I mean, I still did my own prospecting. If they had overflow work, then I could certainly, step in and, take their overflow, things that they weren't going to chase, and I could turn it into dollars for both of us. So it worked out well. It was a great way to learn early on, but again, it was kind of a different time frame. Buyer agency really didn't exist in that era.
Okay, that was still back then.
Yeah. I mean, we could still represent a buyer exclusively, but there was no understanding, the right representation was really something different. There were buyer agency agreements where you could establish yourself with a particular client, but they really weren't honored. So it was a different era for sure.
They weren't honored? What do you mean?
There was no teeth behind them. It wasn't something that was
gotcha.
enforceable. But really, once you kind of started with somebody, it was the relationship aspect that continued it forward. And once you kind of established that, there was really no question, as to moving forward.
I think the longest I ever went without a paycheck was 6 months. Mm-hmm. That's something they don't tell you when you start.
No, for sure. And we when we are talking to people, it is, hopefully you do have some sort of a nest egg, built up, or in a situation where you've got some some support from a partner of some sort to help kind of cover bills. But, at the end of the day, this is entrepreneurship. This is a business that you can make as much or as little money as you intend based upon your effort. And there is going to be a ramp up period. There are opportunities to buy leads in this industry to do things kind of from that perspective. But, that gets pretty expensive pretty quickly. The most profitable way to kind of make your way in this business are really the top of funnel leads, where you have to nurture them. You have to do some relationship building. You have to provide value to people before they're going to trust you. And one of the things that's kind of come about with the recent changes over the past year and a half or so in real estate is that people do have to commit to a realtor fairly early on before really they have that opportunity to do some due diligence. So one of the things that we do practice and preach here is that we need to be able to provide that value to people up front. We want them to see evidence of success out of our realtors, and we want them to really have that confidence not only in the brokerage brand but also at the individual agent level that we are the right person to take care of them.
There's a lot we can help people with. I mean, we see a bunch of houses. We just gain the knowledge from walking through it and talking to the inspectors and seeing what went wrong with previous deals and previous inspections, and we know what to look out for.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. And we try to do a lot of hands-on training with that as well, to where we're taking agents through, homes under construction. We're bringing in inspectors so that people can kind of get real life examples. I really kind of cut my teeth. My growth period in real estate really fell into new construction, but it's funny how that translates into general brokerage sales as well, because I can look at walls and know which one is load bearing and which one isn't, and what kind of modification somebody might be able to make to a home as they're going through it. And some people are visual, some people are not. And some people can absolutely see what, a house might look like after their modifications. And other people need to see, actually probably more need somebody else to do it for them, I guess would make more sense.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you have any new construction companies that you really like?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kind of companies out there. I'm currently working with a group that we're building in Xenia at Right Cycle Estates, but there are a lot of great builders in the local area. And if somebody's looking for something on the production side, there's some quality companies that do that, all the way up through very, very high end custom built homes. Where you're looking $500 a square foot or more. So the Dayton area really does offer a lot of really good builders. There are some exceptional builders that are out there as well for people that are looking for something very high-end luxury. But, Dayton is a pretty affordable market when we kind of look at our averages across the spectrum. So we are able to offer, housing to people at all different income levels.
Is this the only real estate company you've worked at?
No, I actually started at another company that then became a franchise company. And, I'm very passionate about everything local is kind of what it comes down to. With Irongate being, independent, locally owned, real estate company, that was a big draw for me. But no, I was actually at another brokerage for 22 years before moving here. And, I learned a lot there, and it was a great place for me at that point. And this has been a great place for me ever since.
Nice. Yeah, I started at a smaller brokerage up in Sydney that was owned by a friend of mine. It was really fun working with them. They were really knowledgeable. They trained me a lot on what to do, and like the head of the brokerage sat down and actually showed me how to fill out a contract and whatnot when I first started. But the problem I ran into was, since the brokerage was in Sydney, all of my business cards said Sydney, Ohio on it. So I've literally handed cards to people, and they were like, "Oh no, I want a local agent. Thanks though."
Right.
Like, no, I live here. I live here in Dayton. I do this. So I ran into that problem. Also, it was smaller, so they didn't have a whole lot of like advertising resources, which was an issue. And luckily at the time I was still an EMT. I was doing like private medical transports.
Gotcha.
So I was able to do that a couple days a week and work on real estate. But that's when I went that 6 months without any kind of sales, because I had no way to advertise. I had nothing to work with.
Well, and again, it is interesting because, there's really no industry more hyper local than real estate. A house sits where it sits.
Yeah.
And there are national companies, there are franchise companies around. When you kind of reach the point in your career when you look at it from more of a macro level and you're saying, from a high level perspective, what are the services that I provide to my client? And, how can I best do that from, varying brokerage models? A number of years ago, there was, this swell within the industry that it's all about the agent. It's not about the brokerage. What we've kind of evolved since then is, there's a symbiotic relationship between agent and broker. All of those play into the services that we provide to, a home seller who's, looking to list their home, or a home buyer. What can we provide them for them that's a little bit different, a little more tailored toward their need versus what trickles down from above from a broker perspective who, might be based out of New Jersey, might be based out of Seattle, but how does that affect us here in the Miami Valley? We know who our clients are. We know what the job is and how to get it done in the best possible way. We're able to do that here under a brokerage model that provides franchise level tools, but without some of the restrictions that a franchise is going to want to put on their agents. We really want agent autonomy to come forward to where you can best serve your clients and I'll best serve mine. We're both at the end of the day doing the best job that we can, but it doesn't have to be identical.
That's an interesting thing you brought up is different brokerages have different models. So what are some of the different models?
In kind of looking at the current marketplace, there are companies out there that are more cloud-based. It's a brokerage in name only. They are providing tools somewhat at a limited level, but what they're doing is they're really trying to elevate, the name brand of the brokerage. And, these are the agents that typically will work from home. Our model is different in that, we are hyper local. We have buildings that we own, here in the Miami Valley, kind of throughout the region. All of our agents have access to all of our buildings. And we feel that that's important because, when you're learning an industry or when you're working within, a particular business model, you're going to learn by osmosis through the people around you. It's hard to be a professional when, you're sitting in your pajamas making calls, at 1:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So by providing, a professional workspace and tools and support people and support training and staff, it really does elevate the professionalism, in my opinion.
Definitely true. There was a good amount of time, especially I've been to 3 brokerages. There was the one in Sydney, another one, and then finally here. And the second one, they didn't really have a whole lot of reason to go into the office other than to just talk with other agents and kind of chit chat.
Right.
Which I found out was kind of good and kind of bad.
Right.
Like the same reason I wanted to go in the office was the same reason I didn't want to go into the office. It was nice to be able to sit down and have those conversations and overhear other conversations people are having.
Yeah.
But it wasn't fun when you go in there and you have some important phone calls to make and there's a whole bunch of people talking in the background. So
for sure,
I couldn't really work when I went in and I couldn't really learn when I wasn't.
And I get that completely. And it's interesting because the best way to learn is to kind of immerse yourself in the environment, picking up on, the successes and failures that other people have realized and remembering, well, I am going to do this and I'm never going to do that. And again, being able to kind of have those tools that are top of mind ready where you can pull them out as you need to. But you're right. In some cases, and like with your prior brokerage, if being in the building wasn't, a place to be and kind of experience productivity, then that's a problem. It's interesting. We like to have fun at work, but at the end of the day, it is a workplace. And, we want to make sure that we kind of maintain that environment. We have a very family style atmosphere here, but we really want you to be able to thrive to the level that you're looking to. We have agents that, they're doing this for supplemental money and they still do a great job. They care deeply about their clients. And we have people who make tremendous livings in this industry and we're able to meet all of their needs and provide for them as they need to be provided.
There's a lot of interesting little sub niches to real estate. There's like buyers, there's sellers, but there's also real estate investors and property management and commercial real estate.
For sure. And even within those different niches, you can work, estate sales, you can work, Medicaid sales, there are all kind of different designations that you can pursue, the senior real estate specialist, for people who want to work with people who are maybe transitioning out of a home into, a retirement community type of thing. So there's all kind of different avenues that people can work here. Most of us work in an environment we just kind of call general brokerage. With the buying and selling of homes for people, how we come about those people is really where we kind of fine tune our individual businesses. We have people that make, a tremendous living off of social media. We have people who, refuse to set up a Facebook page. So, it's really them kind of designing their business around how they want to work.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. I do not like doing social media. I don't know if I'm good at it or not, but it's just I don't like putting my face out there and being the center of attention.
You've got a great voice for it, so
I've heard that before. Yeah, I'm trying to get better at it. It's not something that I really enjoy.
Well, I think it's one of those things that with practice it becomes more natural. I have no problem speaking in front of a group, but doing something that's more on a social media basis is is a little more challenging. Now, you and I can sit here and have a conversation, and it goes fine and it goes great. But when you're trying to do something more scripted, that's not my style. That's not what I do.
Scripted, it's hard to do that well. It always sounds scripted, and then immediately you're just like, well, you're trying to sell me something I don't want to listen to anymore.
Right. Well, and it's like ChatGPT in the business anymore. Everybody's embracing all of this AI technology, and what a lot of people don't realize is, just like in playing poker, that can be your tell. Everybody knows what a ChatGPT article reads like now. The only thing worse than having to put in the work is somebody recognizing that you didn't. And I think that's
a good saying. I like that.
Yeah, I want to coin that one. So where have you found your successes? I mean, what avenues of the business do you enjoy working more than others?
I really do like helping buyers. Like, I don't mind helping sellers at all. That's still definitely fun. But for some reason, I click more with buyers.
Right.
They're really, really excited. The sellers have been through it once or twice.
For
buyers they also need a bit more help. I really like teaching people things and showing them new stuff. So
buyers are very rewarding, especially first-time home buyers, like you said. I mean, with people who they think they can't afford it, and then we show them a pathway to where they can. Once people kind of realize they can never outsave inflation, then it kind of changes their mindset a little bit, and it makes them kind of lean into the conversation a little more, to where we can say, if you've got a situation where I could put you in a house now, or if you're going to take 2 or 3 years to save up money to make it happen, and now that same house has become unaffordable based upon appreciation numbers, that was a net loss. It wasn't a gain. How do we kind of help people recognize that there is a pathway forward that will kind of help them realize their goals sooner? From the position of especially young families, the best way that they can begin their wealth building process is through the acquisition of real estate. Making a good first buy really can springboard somebody toward future successes.
Yeah. Real estate's one of the few asset classes that really does completely protect you from inflation, because your property price is going to go up along with the inflation.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of people think, I'm going to get a bunch of money, put it in the bank, and then get that 0.5% interest rate or something. But if you leave that money in the bank, you add inflation to that, you've lost money by saving money, which is kind of an odd concept to some people.
It really is. And again, for a home buyer, this is a very intimidating process. There's a study that came out a number of years ago, and it said that every new home buyer, every transaction gets 462 touches. Very few of those are by the actual buyer themselves, which is kind of ironic. But, if they've got somebody that's really guiding them well in the process, educating them as to, what are their expenditures going to be as they're working through that 30 to 60 day relationship, and how can we kind of mitigate those expenses and put them in a position to where they're going to win. We're not picking their house for them by any means. That's their job. But our role in it is to get them the best possible terms that we can to set them up for future successes. Because, what we know is, they're ultimately going to outgrow that home. And, I want to be the one that they call back when they need that assistance a second time. And the best way for me to make that happen is to take extraordinary care of them the first time, to give them not only a great experience, but a solid financial result.
Yeah. And there's a lot we can help with, especially with the contracts, 14, 16 pages now?
Yeah.
They added some to it.
Long, yeah.
So there's a lot in there. There's a lot of little finite details. We know the proper wording to get in there so to keep people out of trouble.
For sure. There's a lot of nuances that we can kind of structure into a purchase offer for somebody that will better meet their goals. Part of our job is how do we negotiate that? As we're kind of coming out of the COVID era and this real estate market that was so insanely fast moving, we really struggled with due diligence. People didn't have time to think through things. And now that the market is stabilizing a bit, we're still in a seller's market, but from a home buying perspective, this is still a fantastic time for buyers to step in and pick up something. Sellers are willing to negotiate a little bit. We can structure offers to that buyer's, best interest, and really put them in a position to where if they had to sell the property in 2 or 3 years, or if they choose to sell it again in 2 to 3 years to make that upgrade, they're going to make money on it, and they're going to come out of it in a very positive financial position.
Investment properties. Do you have any yourself, and have you helped anyone buy any?
I've done the investment thing in the past, and frankly, it was just kind of outside of my personality. You really have to be in a right frame of mind to be a landlord, so I ended up engaging a property manager even for my own properties at that point, just because, at a certain point, you have to recognize, it is a business. It's not a friendship. These are not people I'm claiming on my taxes as dependents. So, property management is a very specialized animal and kind of takes a particular personality to kind of handle it well. I've worked with many investors in the past, and we've come up with some great long-term strategies for them where, they're not necessarily purely driven by, what is their monthly return on the property going to be. They're really playing the long game on it and setting them up with some programs that, give them some long-term tax advantage. Not necessarily from a tax shelter type of position, but it really puts them in an avenue to where at repeated intervals they're able to pull large chunks of equity out of that property tax free because it's a loan against an asset. So there's some kind of great ways to manage this for kind of the long term game for people.
That's what got me into real estate in the first place, was investment properties, and just I started out with the Rich Dad Poor Dad stuff, the Robert Kiyosaki.
Great book.
I started listening to some of their podcasts and a bunch of other podcasts about investing. And there's just some cool stuff in there, but the real estate stuff specifically is what just caught me.
Yeah, for sure.
Because there's just so much to it that can actually help you, not just the monthly income, the cash flow from the property, but also the property appreciating over time, the depreciation on the property. Eventually down the line when you get into borrowing money from your current asset to buy more assets, you didn't sell anything, so you're not paying taxes on it.
Right.
And then when comes time to sell stuff, to buy bigger stuff, 1031 exchange, sell that, use the money to buy something else.
Right.
It's just cool.
It can really be a snowball effect for people who play their cards right. And the key to that is having an agent who has that understanding. It's funny, we'll talk to people and we'll have people come to us and they'll say, well, we've worked with such and such a realtor and, and, it was my daughter's sister's friend's cousin, and we felt we really needed to use them to help them out. And then they start recognize that maybe that person doesn't have the knowledge base of what we're looking for, this more intricate transaction. That's where we're able to kind of step in and kind of guide people into that next stage of how are we putting something together that really makes sense for your portfolio. There's a lot of realtors in the Dayton area. There's a lot of realtors in the state of Ohio, but it doesn't mean that each of them has the same knowledge base. And whether it's that individual person or if they're surrounded by people who can, kind of lend and assist and provide that pathway, they're really going to come out with a much better solution at the end of it for them.
Yeah, it's a whole nother animal when you start talking about the difference between like buyers, sellers, investors, and everything else. So it's really important to get somebody who has that knowledge base on specifically what you're looking for.
Yeah, for sure. And even the differences on those same items between residential and commercial real estate are completely different. We really, really need to make sure that your viewers are recognizing that and are dialing in that you can provide that information for them. Even if it's not a transaction that necessarily you're going to spearhead on something, your involvement in it is going to provide them with the comfort that the transaction is still going to happen to your standards, which is what they're looking for.
Yeah, that's a lot of my content is really just talking about real estate investing. Yeah. I mean, it's buyers and sellers are absolutely great. I love to provide information on how to do both of those things, especially to first-time home buyers. But I think the real estate investing information is just interesting. I think that grabs people's attention. So I try to give them a good amount of education on that.
Right.
And, I mean, it helps them out whether they use me for the transaction or not. But I mean, I'd love to help them out if they do.
Well, and it really is interesting because everybody, before they're jumping into the real estate market, they really need that gift of knowledge. And, for them to be able to sit down with you and have that consultation, and what they're going to learn from you in an hour is going to blow them away to the point where, they're saying, you're the guy that we need to help us through this. It's a very nuanced dance that goes on because, you're establishing these different protocols with your client. And then how do we apply those to all these varying properties that we kind of consider? How does the financing arrangement then kick in with that as well? How can we structure title? Do we need to look at doing a trust, LLC? How are we putting these different animals together to package it all up so that it comes out, to be what they expect it to be? But most consumers have no idea what it takes to get to that point. So I really think that that's where having that conversation with you and gaining that little bit of knowledge, just enough so that they know that, they need a leader who's going to take them through the process. And, that's where you do a great job of that for your people.
There's an interesting conversation that comes up every once in a while when people don't really know what we do as agents. and you have to explain it to them, which is difficult because we do so much. So you almost have to start from the beginning and like sit them down and talk to them for about an hour between the different phases and exactly what we do and what can go wrong in those phases. So that's an interesting challenge when it comes to people who, I don't want to say get an attitude, but they're just those kind of people who like doing things themselves.
Right. Yeah.
And
the DIY thing is real.
Yeah. And you can provide so much value to them. They just don't know what that value is. So getting them to understand that is that's been a struggle.
Well, there's an old saying out there that if you think hiring a professional is expensive, wait till you hire an amateur. And
I like that.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and you're right. People think all we do is turn doorknobs, fill in a couple of blanks, and hey, we'll see you at the closing. There are agents that absolutely will do that, but if you're looking for something that has long-term positive implications, you really need to be working with somebody with the experience behind them to guide you through it, to structure things in such a way that it's not going to cause you harm in the near future, and at the same time it's going to offer long-term gains for you. That whether it's on a primary residence or an investment property, or maybe you're going to help them with both. It's just one of those things to where you really need to kind of lean into your agent, trust their judgment, and if you can't, it's probably the wrong person. If they're telling you what you want to hear versus telling you, what could potentially be your pitfalls in a transaction, what are your strengths in this particular transaction, you really need their honesty. It happens all the time where we hear about agent or people's experience with other agents. Well, I was told I could get this much for the house. Another agent was $10,000 less, and then they end up in a $30,000 deficit because even that little bit of overpricing put them outside of the realm. The stigmatization that then kind of brought about with their property ended up costing them well beyond what it would have sold for if properly positioned, properly marketed from day one.
Yeah. As soon as it hits the market, that's when people's eyes immediately hit it, and you're going to get top dollar at that point. The longer it sits, the more likely you are to get low balls, and people just kind of wasting your time with silly offers.
For sure. We used to call it the reticular activator. If Ethan decided he was going to buy, a new Range Rover, all of a sudden you notice all the Range Rovers on the road that you didn't see before. Same thing happens with people in real estate. As soon as they kind of make that decision that I'm looking to buy, every sign they drive by, and then they start noticing the water cooler conversation at work that, somebody's neighbors getting ready to put their home up on the market, and they're really much more in tune with the marketplace at that point. But how do they use that to kind of propel themselves into the marketplace? And again, word of mouth is huge to my business. That happens by treating people the right way, transaction after transaction. It doesn't matter if it's a $50,000 deal or a $500,000 deal. People need to get the same level of service because one becomes the other, and that's the beauty of our system.
And just the importance of going to an expert for some of this advice is just critical, because I've had one transaction specifically where I believe the property was somewhere around like $180,000, what I thought it should be worth. And I was helping the buyer. This person gets under contract, and there were some issues that came up during the inspection. They started talking to their work friends. The work friends are like, oh, I wouldn't pay over $160 for that now. It's good to talk to people about things, but you have to understand that when you're talking to someone who does this every single day, the perspective is a little bit different.
For sure.
Because, that same person, let's say their friend at work says, oh, I don't think it's worth more than $160. Okay, well, if you bought that house and you were selling it, would you price it for $160? Of course not.
Right.
You'd price it for what I tell you to, $180, because that's what it's worth. So, we know what we're talking about. Your friend may or may not know. Please trust us.
Well, and how does that friend establish value? And I tell a story all the time. I'm going to sell you this $20 bill for $18, and you say no, 16. It was a value at 18. It's a value at $20. That's what it's worth. But there are people who they just have it stuck in their head that asking price is never a value, and sometimes it really is. If the person's personal situation also dictates that, maybe they need a property that's a quick in. That's going to be an easy acquisition because, they're in limbo between residences. That has value as well. In our area here, we negotiate closing date and we negotiate occupancy date. That time also carries monetary value, though. If a seller absolutely has to have X amount of time after closing to be able to move out of the house, they will be willing to take less money for the house for a buyer that's willing to give them that time, as opposed to somebody who's very rigid. Nope, I have to have the key at closing. So these are the little things that we can kind of put into your transaction that are going to facilitate your move. People would always rather lose money than look foolish. And when people put together deals and at the last minute they're having to extend things because every domino didn't fall in the right order, it really does start to reflect on those clients, whether it's buyer or seller. Everybody wants to have a great experience, and that's one of our specialties here is how do we deliver that in an extraordinary way for them.
Do you have any advice for brand new real estate agents or people thinking about getting their license?
Number one, people, they watch HGTV, they see the shows, flip this house and do this thing, and that's not reality. It's reality TV. You are an entrepreneur when you come into real estate. We're all independent contractors, and we need to structure our business in such a way that it is reflective of our own personalities and our own drive. We talked earlier about, how do you find those first clients to work with? And the answer is hard work. This is not an easy job. This is a job that requires many, many skills, many, many hats that we wear. And for new agents especially, they need to come in, they need to treat this like a job. They need to clock in, they need to clock out. They need to not leave work, whether it's in the office, whether it's tidying up their calendar after dinner, but they need to not leave work until the job is done. Go back through your calls on the day, review your text messages at the end of every day, and make sure that everybody who was counting on you for something, they got that touch. And you were able to provide them with a solution at that point. You need to dedicate time every single day toward growing your business. There's a difference between working in your business and working on it. Working in your business is scheduling showings and meeting people at homes, taking them through, contacting lenders, coordinating title inspections, all these different things that we do. But you also have to take that step back and say, let me look at Brett's business and what attention does it need today? Largely, that is going to be in the realm of, where my next transaction is coming from. And, when you've been doing this as long as I have, I'm blessed to have a client base that really provides for me very, very well. But it wasn't always that way. Putting the time into contacting new people, expanding my sphere of influence, really doing community-based marketing, was always huge for me as far as embedding myself in different communities and providing real estate knowledge to the people who live there. It's not always about making the sales pitch. Sometimes it's about providing knowledge, providing a service, and really becoming top of mind for the people that I want to serve. That has been huge for me over the years. Like I said, open houses are a great avenue for home buyers. If you're not sure about who you want to work with as a realtor, go to a few open houses, see who is attentive. See who is paying attention, who can answer tough questions about the market. Judge that against the person who's doom scrolling through TikTok and looks disappointed that you walked in. So, people who take this career seriously, they can make a great living, but they only do that by providing an amazing experience for clients time after time after time. Every opportunity adds to the lifelong journey of them as a realtor. But every opportunity also is, a chance for them to say, Ethan treated me great on my purchase. He'll do the same for you. I'll make sure of it. When people are referring you, they are essentially giving somebody else in their sphere their word that you're going to do your job to the best of your ability. To me, that is the secret to not only success but also longevity in this business.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who get into it for the wrong reason. They get into it because they see a expensive property get sold and they think, oh, I can do that. I can make a bunch of money. And then They hop in when the market's good and everyone's like, the sales aren't too difficult to get. And then slow patch hits and they realize, oh, I didn't really care about this. This wasn't what's the word I'm looking for?
Like a passion.
Yeah, this wasn't a passion for me. This was I was just trying to get a quick paycheck. Let me get out of here. So you get people who've had their license for 5, 10, 15 years. They're willing to go through those ups and downs, and they just love what they do.
And the real loser in that equation is the people who maybe, they got service that was substandard, or maybe it just wasn't well thought. They're now in a predicament or a situation that they didn't want to be in. And we do a whole lot of that. It's like some of our transactions, it really feels like, we're covering up somebody else's bad ink, and we do the best we can with it, and try to get them, structured in such a way that they can move on down the road in a very positive manner. So it's a great industry. It's a job that is different every single day, and the reason it is because of the personalities involved. We're navigating not only, our interpersonal communications with clients, but also, how do we deal with different realtors and their different personalities? And, are they a realtor that's going to be, a good partner in the transaction and getting this deal to a closing because it's going to be a win-win for both parties? Or are we dealing with somebody who's going to be a little more combative and, they want to make sure that their client sees that they're fighting for them, but that might not be their client's goal. They're not looking for the fight. They're not looking for their client, their realtor, to win them something. They want the house, and they want it at the best terms that they can get it. So, for me, it's always been a measure of how do I build these realtor relationships as well to the benefit of my own client. This business, like I said, it's a lot of fun. Every day is different, and it really is what you make of it, regardless of which of the different paths that this industry offers. There can be the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Every client has a different expectation. I'll never forget one time many years ago, I walked into a listing appointment and I'm trying to build a little rapport with this family, and the guy just looks at me. He says, "Brett, not looking for a friend." He goes, "I'm looking for somebody to get my house sold for me." At first I was a little taken aback by that, and then I'm like, cool. Now I know where we're at. And I did end up listing the house. It sat in a floodplain in Kettering. It wasn't necessarily an easy sale, but I had kind of pre-established that with him. That was part of the expectation. But the important part of that was, that as we're looking to kind of build rapport with a prospect, a future client, we are there in a professional capacity. There's a lot of realtors out there, and all they want to do is kind of play the social game. And, they're all over social media, and they're hosting events, and they're doing this and they're doing that. But is that what that client needs? Is that what they're looking for? And there are those people out there. They want to be in the cool kid club for sure. But they have to be able to perform. It's one of those things where I can't tell you how many different transactions that we've kind of pulled out of the fire, even for the other realtor, because we had the knowledge base behind it. We had the experience. We said, hey, let's work together on this. We've kind of been at a bit of a logjam here in this transaction. Let's hit pause and let's just work our way through this. Let's make sure both of our clients are taken care of and that it's a win-win for everybody involved.
I had a situation just like that. There was a newer agent selling the house that my people were buying. Near the end of the transaction, when it came down to the closing date, he almost put his clients in a situation where they had nowhere to live for a day or two because he was just new and he didn't write into the contract that the purchase or the sale was contingent upon them purchasing a new place. Mm-hmm. So the place that they were moving into had something happen. I think a tree fell on the house or something like the day or two before closing. He was like, oh, well, they're just not going to close. Like, that's not in the contract. They are going to close.
Right.
You put your people in a position where they have nowhere to live for a minute. That's on you. So we worked it out. We came together, and because he worked for a different brokerage and they get salary, I guess, instead of commission.
Correct.
So he basically refused to put any kind of money towards like a hotel for his clients, but that was the only way the transaction was going to get done. So I stepped in and did it. So everybody ended up being relatively happy with it. No thanks to him.
Right.
But hopefully he learned a lesson. He doesn't do it again. Like I said, he was a newer agent.
For sure.
So,
sales karma is real, and doing the right thing for people, even if you have to dig into your pocket a little bit to kind of make things, to make them right, whether it was, something on our side of the ledger or not, it'll come back to you, as a realtor. And, we all have agents that we've worked with many times in the past, and we have great transactions with them. And I know it's going to be another great transaction because we work well together. We both have the same objectives. Not that we're not each individually representing our parties to the best of our abilities, because that is a absolute pillar of my business. But I do it in such a way that it's respectful, it's honest, it's above board. There are other agents, like you just kind of described, where it's more important that they can demonstrate to their client that they fought for them. But again, is that client sitting there going, that really wasn't what I needed. What I needed was my problem solved. We in this industry, we tend to be great problem solvers. That's a big part of what we do. Things happen in transactions. Things happen outside of the control of either realtor. Sometimes it might be on a lender. There could be a last minute inspection issue. There could be an appraisal snafu at the last minute. What do we do to kind of solve those issues, to smooth out those bumps for our client first, for the transaction second, and try to keep everything on track if that is what the goal of our client still is at that point. We've had situations in the past where, my buyer closes on a house and we have a U-Haul truck out in the parking lot, and they're expecting that key at the closing, and then the seller across the table says, "Oh, by the way, not going to be out of the house yet. Not even sure when I'm going to be out, but it won't be today." At the closing table, the first inclination is to get that little artery pumping in your temple, and to get very upset about it. Our role is to find the solution. We cannot mirror our client's emotion, because now all we're doing is compounding the problem. We have to be the one who steps back and says, let's find a solution here, because this is unacceptable. How do we work that problem forward? Is there a guarantee that we're going to get that solved in the next hour so they can move in? Absolutely not. But we're playing the cards that are dealt to us at that point, and we're going to try to find the best possible solution given the circumstances, because it is a very fluid transaction. Things are ebbing and flowing all the time, in this 30-day period between contract and close. An agent has to have their finger on the pulse of the transaction at all times, 24 hours a day in some cases. When these things happen, if you're at one of these brokerages, like we said, it's kind of cloud-based and nobody knows each other and there's nobody to ask, that's a tough island to be on. But when you can go into the office and ask 2 or 3 or 4 different high-producing agents, "Hey, have you ever had this before?" And maybe you get a couple of no's, and you get one that says, "Yeah, and here's how we handled it." And you're like, "That's right in my wheelhouse. I got this." And then you go back to your client and you've got a solution in mind, and we push forward. And again, nobody wants those last minute things to come up in a transaction at all. But when they do, how do we help find the solution to the best interest of our client?
So how did you end up solving that problem where someone needs to move in and they can't?
Well, in this particular case, it was poor communication between the listing agent and the seller at that point. And we were basically able to force the hand to where, now you do not have this extra time. And we drew a hard line in the sand with basically turning it into a legal situation and having them, thrown out of the house, and their stuff then becoming, the possession of the new buyer. They didn't want that. And once they understood that that was kind of the alternative to the situation, their motivation changed, and they were able to find that new moving company to get them out of the house. And, in that situation, it worked out that way. And nobody wants things to turn things legal, except for the attorneys. They're the only ones that are going to win. We all know that. But, in a case like this, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our client to, make sure that happens. We have different measures that we can act on, but at the end of the day, I'm a realtor. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a cop. I'm not a bailiff, and I'm not a repo guy. So, but I am going to use my resources at that point to solve my client's problem to the best that I can, because, I still want to work with them again in the future. I don't want to have to avoid people at Kroger. I want to walk up and high five them. So again, it's a business that people get into sometimes for the wrong reason. This is a very serious job. This is a career that's very demanding. People say that, you can control your own schedule. Well, your clients control your schedule. I tell people all the time, I work, days that end in Y, and I work half days, 9 to 9. So it's, sometimes I wish it was only 9 to 9, but my job is to take great care of my clients, and that's what I intend to do every time, I put my pen to paper and commit to represent them, whether it's buyer or seller.
And the biggest thing we can do is just tell people the truth.
Absolutely.
Like the seller from that transaction where he didn't tell them that, "Oh yeah, by the way, when you hand those keys over, you don't live there anymore, you need to get out."
Right.
I'm sure if that person had actually communicated that, it wouldn't have been an issue at all. But because they didn't, it became a gigantic issue.
Correct. That seller legitimately believed that they had 30 days to move out. And it was just an unwritten rule that they believed to be true. I'm assuming that listing agent presented the paperwork to them fully. I don't know that. when you don't know if somebody's really listening or if they're only hearing. So who knows how we got to that situation, but, rather than getting red-faced, our job is to find the path forward. Yeah, it turned around pretty quickly. I've done business with those people since then, which, was somewhat of a blessing at that point, being how that transaction ended. We all want them to end with a smile and a handshake. But you never know when the issues are going to pop up or what they're going to be. But as realtors, we have to be prepared. And that's why, we do final walkthroughs on property. We make sure that, everything is as it's supposed to be. We're validating that repairs were completed on time and with proper workmanship. So, we can do our due diligence to, the best that we can to protect our people.
Yeah, that final walkthrough is really important. Make sure that anything they said that they were going to fix during the inspection period, that they actually got it fixed, and that they didn't put a hole in the wall with the couch on their way out.
Right. We've seen situations where floors get scratched, where your houses are just left with a tremendous amount of stuff in them, and even just recently we had one of those. And sometimes things happen. We can only control what we can control. We can do a final walkthrough on a property before closing, but if that seller has negotiated to stay there for 2 weeks, we really need to consider doing another final walkthrough prior to accepting occupancy on that property. Because, what it looked like 2 weeks ago is going to be potentially dramatically different from what it looks like today, or maybe not that different, if they don't intend to vacate as promised. So it's something that we really need to consider. How does that whole transaction go, kind of from beginning to end? If we have a seller that was very combative about things and wasn't acting on things that were previously agreed, in writing, then we need to consider that as we're moving forward as the realtor to say, I have to validate every step of this process throughout this particular transaction.
Giving people proper education on exactly what's going on and just possibilities. Mm-hmm. If they're not surprised, generally they're not angry. If they're caught off guard, they tend to get angry really quickly. One thing I always tell people when we go over the contract is if something breaks day before closing, it's on the seller. Anything breaks day after closing, it's on you. You bought the house.
Correct.
And people really need to understand that. Because perfect example, I was helping somebody. Transaction was going perfectly fine. We do the final walkthrough, no issues at all. Next day we close. Day or two after that, the sump pump goes out and there's water in the basement now. And they were like, well, we got to get them to fix this. It's your house. Unfortunately, it fell on you. I told you. You bought it. It wasn't broken when we did it 2 days ago.
Right.
I don't think they went in there and sabotaged it. I think it was just terrible luck. But that is how that works.
I've always had this fear of closings in May and June just because, that's when the air conditioner is going to stop working. Not the day before closing, but the day after closing.
Always.
And you're right. Things do happen and karma is real for sure. Is it something that was potentially missed in an inspection? Was a home warranty provided? A seller has to maintain the house through the turnover of occupancy, not just closing. And we've had cases where a seller is in a house for another week after closing, and they'll call the buyer 3 days into it and be like, "Oh, bad news, your refrigerator's dead." Well, actually, that's still your refrigerator, and it's your responsibility, as the prior owner and continuing occupant of the property, that you either need to repair it or replace it, and that is clearly spelled out in our contractual language. So, and sometimes it's, we as the realtor end up being the bad cop. We have to have those difficult conversations. We're not in a bartering society anymore to where everybody has, skills of negotiating over tomato, much less, a townhouse. So we do get to be the ones that, we'll have to be bad cops sometimes, but that's what we're hired to do. We are the experts. We are the ones that are going to manage that transaction for our principals.
Do you have any current goals you're working on?
Goals?
Yeah.
Yeah, my goals are probably a little different than a lot of newer agents kind of getting into it. I really struggle with kind of work-life balance, and so I'm always kind of trying to work through things like that. Contractually and kind of professionally, I'm always looking to add more people to my sphere. I have a very productive sphere. People take great care of me because I take great care of them. But yeah, my goals, my production level tends to be, within 10% up or down, pretty consistent year to year. Again, I'm very blessed to have a client base that kind of helps me through that. From a professional standpoint, the goals as you age turn into more life goals than professional goals. And sometimes that's very difficult because, when you're geared to serve, when that's how you're wired up, sometimes it's very difficult to take that step back and to schedule time off, to be able to recharge the batteries a little bit and kind of clear the mind. But, I got to tell you, closing in on 31 years of doing this, I still love what I do on a daily basis. And I don't know a lot of people that can say that about their careers. But like I said, I've been very blessed in this industry, and the people I work with, people I work for, they've taken good care of me, and I'll continue to do the same for them.
I have a buddy of mine. He's actually in the Air Force. He's living over in Japan, and me and him for years now, we get together once a month and we set goals for the month and talk about what we've been doing. He's in the process of writing a book, so a lot of his are like book oriented and some career oriented. A lot of mine are career oriented. I think recently I focused a lot on trying to get the social media set up because right now the market is a little bit slow, so I've had the time to actually put effort into that and learn skills that I didn't have before, which is pretty neat. Yeah, that's something that's pretty nice. Me and him get together once a month and do that.
And that's important. And just like with high-level athletes, they always say, you need to do more than one thing. By having those conversations with somebody else, sometimes it does give us the insight into looking, again, at our business from a different perspective to say, could I turn this dial a little more? Could I make this level of service better? Can I back away from something that maybe isn't performing to the level that it used to? And that, perpetual reevaluation on not only the job we're doing it, but how we're doing it, I think is very, very important. And having those people in your world that you can kind of have open and honest, deep conversation with at a different level is very, very beneficial. And, I have friends from my prior brokerage, just from other brokerages, people in other but supporting industries. I frequently have conversations just to, again, make sure that I'm looking at things not through rose-colored glasses. I want to see things clearly. I have a friend of mine that works in advertising, and he called me one time a number of years ago, and he says, "Do you eat?" I said, "Yeah, I eat." He goes, "You know what? I eat too." He goes, "And I'm kind of sick of eating lunch by myself." And he's like, "Why don't we get together once a month and let's just have lunch together and talk shop, not talk shop, whatever it might be." Again, he's in a complementary industry. I provide him with kind of an equal amount of response for his industry as well. Just those little things that you can do, not only from a business perspective, but even with past clients or future clients. And what did you enjoy about, buying a car? What did you not enjoy about, your last real estate transaction? And how do we implement those things into our own world?
One thing that somebody said to me once, and I always keep it in mind because it's a good saying, there's a difference between being busy and being productive. You can be busy doing all sorts of stuff, but if it's not helping you, it's a waste of time.
Right. Well, what's the other saying that goes along with that? That luck is where you find the intersection of inspiration and perspiration, and you have to kind of put the work in for sure. But and what you just described is kind of my end of the day routine. It's, again, taking that last look through the text messages, through the calls, through the email list, and making sure that the job is done. I talk to agents all the time, and it's interesting because I'm like, well, did you do some prospecting today? Well, I went through Facebook looking for people, who mentioned that they were looking for a realtor. That's not productive busy. I'm not even sure that's busy. What are you doing to actually force a conversation? And that's really kind of what we need to do in this industry is we need to have those real estate related conversations. But where do you find the people to have them with? We're surrounded by them. Real estate is a topic everybody wants to discuss. Start with the A's in your contact list and just kind of work your way through it. People who don't own a house want to. People who do own a house are thinking about their next one, whether it's bigger or smaller than their current one. Maybe they're thinking second home. Maybe they're thinking investment property. For people who are, in their 20s and 30s, picking up an investment property especially can pay you a dividend every decade, for the rest of your life if you play your cards right. You're picking up the right property and the right price point, with tenants that are going to be able to you maintain the property for you. People that are willing to stay in a house 3-4 years before they're moving on to their next goal, but you still own the property. You're building equity in it and you're gaining a tax advantage. But again, through different financing incentives that you and I have discussed in the past, people can pull tremendous amounts of cash out of a property tax-free and still retain the property and then do it again. And if they're timing this at different stages of life where they have things that are going to be coming up, and they're going to be having kids and graduations and marriages and grandkids and college and all these different things, a real estate portfolio can pay for those for you if you manage it properly. Even if you don't think you have the personality type like me to be a landlord, through property management, you can realize those same goals with minimal effort, really set yourself up for a very lucrative future in retirement.
You can write off the property management fees too.
Absolutely. It's not an expense, it's a service. So it's something that don't let it hold you back from investing in real estate.
That was something I was going to ask you that I forgot about before. First investment property is usually the hardest because you don't have the equity or the experience to draw on from the other properties. How did you get your first one?
My first one was actually a house that I had originally talked to them about listing and selling for them. This was in a time period when we were listing houses, we were signing listing agreements for a year, hoping it would sell within then. In this particular case, it was a family situation with these people, and they needed that house payment off of their books. I ended up buying the property from them kind of off market. I ended up taking over their payment for a given amount of time. I refinanced the property, took their names off of it, instilled it in my name at that point, and was able to move forward from there. So it was a very easy in on that property. It's not something you see a great deal of anymore necessarily, but there are still ways out there to easily acquire property and to build a real estate portfolio.
I was telling people the way I got my first one was with a DSCR loan, the debt service coverage ratio loans. Yes. I didn't even know those existed until I talked to the right lender.
Right.
I talked to a couple before that had similar programs, but they didn't apply to me. Some of them wanted you to own your own home first, and this one, it gave you a little bit of a ding. You got a little bit of a worse rating with it, but it still allowed you to not have your own home before you actually go out and get this first investment property. So that was pretty cool.
DSCR is a great animal and a way to make that happen. It's something that, again, through the evolution of the business, it didn't really exist kind of back in the day. But these are the tools that are out there that when you're working with the right team of people, and you just kind of hinted at that, I don't have a real estate team necessarily as far as agents working under me, but what I have is a great team of people who work alongside of me, and my lending partners, my title partners, home inspectors, home improvement people, handyman, handywoman, people who do all these different services that help make me look good to my clients. But having lenders who have options for people is absolutely critical for realtors. People want to just work with their friends. People want to just do this and do that. But there's a whole world of people out there who have differing programs that might benefit somebody even more. So, having that quality team of really well educated people who are committed to their industry as much as I'm committed to mine, and where I can put my client in front of them and know that they're going to be taken care of. So I take those relationships every bit as seriously as I take my past client relationships, in the hopes that they're going to send me business. I want to make sure that my team of professionals that work with me are going to take extraordinary care of my clients as well.
Absolutely. So I've got a bunch of people that I feel the same way about. That just over the years, they've done nothing but great work, and they've helped everybody I've sent their way. They know what they're doing. I've worked with a bunch of people who didn't, whether they were lenders or title companies or whatnot. Just you find the good people, you keep them, and then you use them.
Absolutely. And, I have a handful of lenders that I work with, and they are all great people. And they all know that I have other relationships there as well, because, from a lending perspective, they're only as good as the products that their particular lending institution has to offer. And in some cases, it may not be, even though they may be the better personality matchup, this lender over here may have the better program for them. And again, it's a short-term relationship. I'm still going to honor both of them with future business. When it comes down to putting a person in a particular property, that loan program is really, that's going to be the, you date the rate and you marry the house, because your interest rate is going to be temporary. Yeah. You can always refinance it. But that particular property is going to be yours for a longer period of time. But having the right people in place to get those deals done in the best possible way from day one is really, really invaluable to us in our career.
You reminded me of something I said to people a long time ago, when the first thing anyone ever really says when they're trying to talk themselves out of buying a house, or they're just hesitant about it, is, oh, the rates are too high, I want to wait for the rates to go down. Mm-hmm. And the rates, at least in my opinion, it's not that important, because like you said, you date the rate. The rate is not there forever. Correct. Let's say you buy at a high rate, or you buy at a rate, whatever it is today, blam, you're stuck in that rate for 30 years. You're not. You can refinance the house. Mm-hmm. So if the rate goes up, cool, you bought at the right time, it stayed there. If the rate stays the same, cool, you didn't lose any money, or you didn't lose out on a good rate, and you built equity in the house. Right. And if the rate goes down, then you refinance at the new lower rate. It's really not that big of a deal.
It isn't. And right now, I mean, at our current interest rates, every $1,000 somebody finances is going to cost them about $6.50 a month. With consumers, they're really more interested in can I afford this house on a monthly basis, as opposed to, what is my actual acquisition cost? Now, if you're an investor, that's a little bit different when you start talking about cap rates. But, from a borrowing perspective, most money comes from the Federal Reserve. So everybody's going to be paying about the same rate. And yes, you can jump into adjustables, you can do 2-1 buy downs, you can do points and discount fees to try to get a little bit of a better rate. But unless you're planning on keeping that mortgage in the long term, by no means should people be doing that, because there's enough fluidity in that market that, they can own the same property and have a much better deal on it a year from now, or 2 years from now. What it really comes down to is the rate is the rate, and real estate is always a fantastic investment. People were buying real estate when it was 18%. They were finding ways to make it happen. Some of those people still own those houses today, believe it or not.
They're worth a lot more now than they were.
Yeah. I mean, when I bought my first home, it was on a special rate program, and my rate was 9.5%. And I was thrilled because everybody else was paying 11, and it gave me a little more buying power. It made the house a little more affordable for me. And the first opportunity I got, I refied out of it, So the rate is nothing but a tool. It's part of the mechanism of the process. If you can afford the house today at this rate, you're going to be able to afford it tomorrow at that same rate. But, I do caution people, work with reputable lenders. If you've ever seen the movie The Big Short, that's kind of what led to the mortgage crisis of 2008. And it was largely based around, inappropriate relationships between lender, between appraiser, the way that fees were kind of structured at that time. Precautions have been put into place. We're not going to see something like that happen again. You're better off to buy a house today at today's rate rather than waiting for tomorrow and tomorrow's rate, because you own it. You can still get tomorrow's rate tomorrow through a refinance, but when you acquire that property, that's where, that's your new starting line. And again, whether it's a primary residence, secondary home, or an investment property, if you can afford it, you can afford it. We're really going to be conscious of not overselling people on property. We don't want anybody to be house rich, life poor. Through our guidance and kind of the full disclosure aspect of what we do, we want to make sure that people are getting the appropriate house.
Yeah. Yeah, it's much more important for us that somebody's happy at the end of that transaction than if we made just a ton of money.
No, for sure. Yeah. And even going back to the example of $6.50 per thousand, when people are putting down their down payment, if somebody says, well, I want to make sure that I put down another $10,000, well, let's take a quick step back and look at that.
So $65 a month.
It's $65 a month, or you can have a $10,000 cushion in the bank. Which one do you value more? And to some people, it's going to be, no, I want the equity in the house, and that's great. We can make that happen. To other people, that cushion is completely invaluable. You lose your job, you're not going to lose your house because you've still got, a $10,000 buffer there, until you can kind of replace the career. But, when you start thinking about things a little bit differently, and it's not just house, purchase price, payment, and you start looking at it as asset, yes, it's still your home. That makes it personal. There's an emotional attachment there. We get that. How do we turn that play into something that's going to, again, kind of support you through the rest of your life through subsequent purchases that you're going to make? Maybe you're going to hang on to it as a rental property. It's tough to do if it's a house that you've lived in and loved. But, for people that have the personality for it, it can be just a great path forward.
So we've been talking about real estate for like an hour. Tell me about something that's not related to real estate. What do you do when you're not doing this? What are you passionate about other than real estate?
I love to cook. I like to travel, see all the things that life has to offer. And when you kind of crossed over that threshold of you have fewer years ahead of you than you have behind you, you start to look at things a little bit differently, and what are my next goals going to be? So, again, loving what I do, I don't feel it like work. It's just part of me. When I end my day, I know that I've done the best that I could do. And I know in my 30-year career, I've earned absolutely every dollar that I've made. It's not a clock punching job to where you can just go in and mail it in and say, well, I really got one over on the boss. Because, when you're the boss, when you're the owner of your own little slice of the real estate pie here, you have to treat that with respect as well. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Like I said, I enjoy restaurants. I enjoy cooking. I enjoy most things local. I'm a big fan of Dayton. When I hear people kind of down talk my town, I kind of ruffle my feathers over it. And the people that don't appreciate Dayton are people that have never lived anywhere else. But when you think about our town here, for the size of the community that Dayton is, there's a fantastic art scene. There's great restaurants in town, with semi-pro sports, with, great college teams, museums, parks, districts, everything else, our rails to trail system. It really is a great place to live and, a great place to raise a family.
I'll say I really did not appreciate Dayton and Ohio until I moved out to Oklahoma for 3 years. Mm-hmm. Realized how much I hated it out there and moved right back here. One thing I did not realize is just how many good pizza places there are here.
Oh, that's true.
There's so many.
I did a podcast once on Dayton style pizza. We have our own style, which is the edge to edge toppings, square cut, and we will absolutely fight people over it.
That's right. And, Donato's, Casanos, is there any others? Marion's?
Marion's.
All awesome.
Joe's Pizza on Airway Road, my personal favorite. If you've not tried it, I'll treat you to one.
I forgot about them. I think a long time ago. Yeah. We did try them again.
But yeah, there's a fantastic scene here in town, and like we said, it's a great place to live. The housing's affordable. We never get too high, we never get too low on things. We're kind of middle America, and that suits me just fine.
Yeah, the prices here are not terrible. I was looking at moving to Denver for a minute because I worked for one of the government agencies, and they had an opening out there, and I thought, oh, Denver sounds pretty cool. I've heard nothing but good things about Denver. Go there. For one, it looks like Dayton.
Yeah.
I don't know what people are freaking out about. It looks like Dayton. It is what it is. But if you look real hard, there's some mountains in the background. It's not that impressive. But the prices out there were insane. This was probably 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
And the price I found when I shopped around for a studio apartment in just not a terrible area. It wasn't like the best. It wasn't the worst. It was just kind of a mediocre area. I think it was $900 to $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
Just for that.
Just for a little bitty place the size of a garage.
Like 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
You probably could have got something like that for $600 over here.
And it's probably 50% more than that now,
Oh yeah. Now I'm sure it's crazy. And that was just in the city of Denver. That wasn't in like Boulder or anywhere that was really nice either.
Well, and it's funny, and what we're kind of talking about is really plays out when you think about how many people move back.
Yeah.
People will move away because they're going to chase some life adventure, and then they're like, yeah, this isn't where I want to raise my family. And then, they come back, and a lot of times they settle into, a similar area to where they left. And, I think, again, that really speaks volumes about this area. We're convenient to, a lot of different municipalities and places to see. There's major cities within a day's drive. You can do some great weekend trips. This is home, and it's good when you come back.
There's just enough to where you can always find something to do if you need something to do.
Yeah.
It's not too much. There's not too many people right on top of you doing everything.
Right.
But there's always stuff to do.
No, for sure, and we're very Midwest, you know. For people that appreciate that, that's great. For people who don't understand it, you will. Everybody kind of keeps to themselves, and I mean, everybody's neighborly but not nosy. I wouldn't say everybody necessarily, but for the most part, I mean, there's great shopping here. And Cincinnati's just down the road. Columbus is just over that way. Pittsburgh's not far. Chicago's not far. Indianapolis, Louisville, Lexington. You
can get to Canada in 3 hours.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, just the other side of Cleveland. So, yeah, it's a great spot to live. That's for sure. And with a local airport here, and like we said, Columbus and Cincinnati airports nearby, there's affordable ways to get everywhere.
And there's Skyline.
And there's Skyline. The Ohio bomb is when you dip a White Castle into Skyline chili. So it's topic for another podcast. So
can't say I've ever had that.
No, don't.
I like it. Anything else local to Ohio that other places might not have? I know Jets Pizza started in Michigan, but they're down here now. Jets is awesome.
Yep, Jets is awesome. That's your kind of Detroit style pizza, and people here, like I said, they're very passionate about our pizza for sure, and we like our homegrown stuff. You know, we have all the franchises as well, but yeah, for the most part, the lines are going to be at the locally owned places.
Yeah,
which is definitely good, and there is a big sense of, you know, support local here in the area. You know, we tend to try to frequent locally owned businesses as much as possible, and again, that kind of comes back to an Irongate thing with us being just, you know, a hyper local, you know, real estate operation. You know, we do the Miami Valley very, very well. And, you know, we don't really extend our focus too far out of that because, you know, we know where we're supposed to be, you know, and that's right here in the greater Dayton area.
I'm down to keep talking, but I don't want to steal all your time if you got other stuff to do.
Always a pleasure, sir. We'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely. This is awesome.
Looking forward to it. Absolutely. Take care.
I appreciate this studio too. You put this together, right?
Yeah, we worked on this, and you know, with ownership, it really came together pretty nicely, and happy to be sitting here with you using it with the blue background lights and everything.
Yeah. I mean, not only is it functional, it's beautiful too.
Yeah, it's pretty stuff.